Hi, my name's Jonathan Singer. I'm the founder and host of the Social Work Podcast, and I am very excited to be talking to you today as part of Dr. Julie Hanks's Rock the Media School. Now, I'm a social worker, I'm a researcher, I'm a professor, and I'm also the founder and host of the Social Work Podcast. And it's with that hat that I'm talking to you today. The Social Work Podcast, I founded it in 2007. Over 2 million people from 181 countries have visited the website. About 50,000 people download episodes every month, and each new episode is downloaded about 4,000 times in the first 48 hours. Now, I've interviewed a bunch of folks, and I've learned some things along the way about what makes for a good podcast guest. So, the first thing is to be prepared. If you're a guest on a podcast, it's because you're an expert about something. So you want to have facts and figures at your fingertips. If I'm interviewing you about trauma, because, say, maybe in your practice you specialize in trauma, and I say, so how many people have experienced trauma? Well, you want to be able to recite some facts and figures off the top of your head. And you don't want to just make them up, be like, oh my God, so many people have experienced trauma. You want to be able to say, oh, this percentage of people, this is what it's like, etc., etc. There's this study called the ACEs. So you want to be able to throw out some information to make yourself sound like an expert. The second thing is tell stories. Audio podcasts in particular are things that people listen to while they're on the go. They listen to them on the bus, in the car, when they're mowing the lawn, on the treadmill, walking their dog, and they want to be captivated and engaged. And so if you are a therapist who has a trauma-focused practice, you can tell some stories, maybe not necessarily about your clients, because that could address some confidentiality issues, but talk about something having to do with trauma, recovery from trauma, ways that trauma can be addressed in a story form, something that'll really captivate the audience. And podcast hosts love that sort of stuff, because then we don't have to draw out questions and we know that our audience is going to be engaged. Now, the other piece for being a good podcast guest is to make sure that you are not promoting your business. Now, I know that might sound counterintuitive. Like, why am I going to try and get involved in the media if I'm not going to be promoting myself? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm busy, and so promotion is what it's all about. Here's the thing. When you're on an audio podcast, your audience is essentially the interviewer and one other person. Right? Podcasts are a medium of one. When I do a podcast interview, I'm assuming that there's going to be one person listening with headphones to what I have to say. So you don't want to push yourself as being the private practice expert to this one person. They've already bought into it. You just want to show that you are the expert. Now, there are a couple things you should do in advance of an interview. You should say, hey, so I wrote this article, or I wrote this book, or I have this private practice. How is that going to get mentioned? How's that going to get worked into the podcast? Well, some podcast hosts might be like, go for it, talk about it, I don't care. And others might say, hold off. Let me be the one that promotes you as a brand and you focus on your area of expertise. If I have somebody that's on my podcast and they've just written a book and they keep saying things like, well, you know, in my book that was published by Routledge Press that you can get on Amazon, blah, 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 like, that's just going to piss me off. I'm not going to be interested because what it says is you are here promoting yourself and that is explicit. What I want is some expertise. I want some content. Specifically for my podcast, I don't have what they call sort of a timely podcast. I have what they call an archival podcast. I do episodes where the information should be as relevant in 5 years as it is today. So that can limit some of the amount of, oh, go buy this, it's on sale for the next 2 weeks kind of information. So those are some tips and pointers for being on a podcast and being a good podcast guest. Now, there's some technical sides. If you're being interviewed remotely, meaning that the person who's running the podcast is in another state or city, then what you might have is you might have a situation where they're calling you on Skype or using Google Hangouts or some other form of technology. What you're going to want to do is be podcast ready. That means you've already purchased a good headset mic that can plug into your computer. You've got a quiet environment. If there's a video, you've got the lighting on you as opposed to behind you. So just some very basic production skills. And that's going to make a world of difference. Because if the podcast host has to say, hey, there's a lot of static, or you're like, hey, can we do this over my cell phone? They're going to say no. Cell phones don't work. Landlines aren't great. The best thing to use is Skype or Google Hangouts or something like that. Now, the last thing that I'm going to say is that for my podcast, I rarely have people on twice. But if you want to be a repeat customer on a podcast, the best way is to make sure that you and the podcast host are having a good back and forth banter, right? Somebody that the podcast host is going to say, I enjoyed that. I want to have that person back. I want this person to talk about this topic or a related topic in the future. I can't be more specific than that because every topic is going to be different. But making sure that folks are having a good time while they're learning and that you are providing the kind of expertise information that people want to know and will benefit from hearing about are the best things you can do to be a great podcast guest. So I hope this was helpful. If it is, you know where to find me, socialworkpodcast.com, and I hope you have an amazing time with the amazing Dr. Julie Hanks.